The Metroid series is one that I've always enjoyed, though my feelings on the franchise have altered pretty dramatically in the months leading up to Metroid Dread. In honor of the announcement of Metroid 5, I decided that I would play through all 4 of the Metroid games leading up to this new entry, while also dabbling into Metroid 2 twice through the Samus Returns remake and the AM2R fan game. It took me over 2 months to release those 5 videos, and it was during that time that my feelings changed. It was then where I transitioned from a fan of the Metroid franchise into something very different. I began to question what exactly Metroid was. It's easy to look at the franchise and see what it is, so to speak, but what potential did it have in the modern age? Is there a place for Metroid still in 2021 and beyond? October 8th came, Metroid Dread released, and that question was definitely answered.
Hello and welcome. I am Zabraxi. It's time. It's finally time. We get to talk about Metroid Dread. It's been out for a little while now. I have played it several times over, and I have a lot to say. If you've watched any of my previous videos on this series, you know full well that I like to talk. A lot. It's been 5 other episodes and several months and also like 19 years, but I finally get to say this. Let's jump into Metroid Dread. Let's go! Oh, that feels so good to say.
This marathon has been quite an interesting experience, both in terms as a video game enjoyer, but also as a creator. I grossly underestimated just how long it would take to do a retrospective series across 5 games. Those guys out there that do retrospectives regularly, like Liam Triforce or King K, I get it now. I get why it takes so long. I knew early on that I would want to wait to deliver this Metroid Dread video until at least after a month of the release date. This would give me some time to really sit down on my thoughts without responding in pure emotion or hype.
I'm also just really crap at time management.
I mean it when I say that this is going to be a deep dive into Dread, so please, if you want to avoid spoilers, please, I beg of you, stop watching. I know that's like a cardinal sin to anything, but stop watching my stuff if you don't want spoilers. This is not going to be a review justifying whether or not this is a solid purchase decision. This will be an analysis about Metroid Dread as an art piece. In true Metroid fashion, we should start things off with a bit of a recap. Seriously, you can go if you don't want spoilers, like for real, this is the last chance. Dread kicks things off with yet another synopsis of the events thus far. While a series recapping the story for the player is normal, what I never expected was that the Super Metroid theme would show up yet again. This version of the Super Metroid theme is absolutely incredible, and I feel like it's overshadowed most tracks, and now I will forever expect a new rendition from each and every Metroid game in the future. It's impossible to deny that hearing this song immediately makes me super ready for a brand new sci-fi adventure, especially when the recap doesn't involve Super Metroid at all. Wait, what? Yeah, it's a bit odd, right? Hearing that the Super Metroid theme is playing, but yet you never see anything about Super Metroid itself. It's not only Super that's left out, by the way. In fact, the only game that's actually properly recapped here is the story of Metroid Fusion. This does make sense, but it's also kind of questionable. There's been a lot of commentary about how Nintendo has done almost nothing to allow customers to play the 2D Metroid series on modern consoles. It's true that you can play the original Metroid and Super Metroid on the Nintendo Switch Online service, but that doesn't do very much for you if the recap doesn't even seem to think that those story beats are worth acknowledging. Again, this does make sense, but yes, okay. The events of Metroid Fusion are easily the most relevant, since Dread will be dabbling back into the story of the X-Parasites. I only find this decision questionable because it was 19 years since Metroid Fusion, so having a bit of a story recap of Metroid 1 through 4 just seems like it would provide much better context. Especially some of the Chozo information from Metroid Zero Mission, since that's really incredibly pertinent given some of the details that we're gonna touch on later. Yeah, the Chozo are kind of a big deal now. Anyway, the brief summation of it all is that the events of Metroid Fusion saw Samus eradicate the Metroids and the X-Parasites, along with even blowing up planet SR-388, the homeworld to both of those creatures. It would seem that footage of a living X-Parasite has now surfaced on a distant planet known as ZDR. Samus, being the only one immune to the X-Parasite, heads out to that planet. Dispatched already to ZDR is a series of research robots known as EMI, robots designed specifically for the purpose of analysis.
Or to be used as a weapon.
Oh, and if you're like me and wondering who this Exelion Star Corporation is, well, I have good news for you. No, I don't. I'm lying. Nobody knows who this is. It would seem that as of the recording of this, there's no additional information about this company throughout anything, but shout out if you happen to notice the name never came up in Metroid before. Approaching closer to the planet, the Atom computer insists to Samus that the bounty for this mission isn't sufficient while she sonic booms into the atmosphere of ZDR. We see Samus on the ground in a blue suit. Now she's down an elevator in an orange suit. She's fighting a big bird, and then reawakens in a blue suit.
And I'm officially confused.
By this point, the only thing we really can piece together is that Samus is reawakening after the encounter with this Chozo. Samus landed on ZDR, delved deep into the planet, and along the way bumped into this warrior bird who absolutely annihilates her. This bit right here where the Chozo is holding up Samus by the neck and Samus reaches out and then some flowing energy kicks in, we're really gonna want to remember that. Trust me.
This is some foreshadowing. We're gonna come back to that, I swear.
It's here that Samus awakens from the encounter, and while clearly defeated, she still seems able to get up and our adventure starts. Granted, there's no cool Samus coming out of her ship jingle, which instantly makes me think this game is garbage tier, but I'm willing to give it a shot. But I'm gonna miss that jingle so much. Alright, it's the very first moments of controlling Samus in the modern age, and wow, damn, this feels so good. I had played Ori and the Will of the Wisps last year and claimed that it had possibly the best movement of any Metroid-inspired game. Dread comes in and makes Ori hold its beer because this is genuinely the best controlling Metroid-styled title that the gaming media has ever seen until this point. The cliched way of describing this would be snappy, so yeah. It's snappy. It's really, really damn snappy. There are a lot of advancements to controlling Samus this time around. The progress that's been made from Samus Returns is striking, and you can easily see the influence that brought Mercury Steam to this point. I can't believe these are the same people who made Lords of Shadow. I even have a video on this very channel from 2014 doing a first impressions of Lords of Shadow 2, and all I did was kick and scream the entire time. If I would have known that the same people would end up being in charge of the 2D Metroid series, I probably would have cried. Then we enter the world of Planet ZDR, and every worry I ever had evaporates. This is truly the Mercury Steam redemption arc that I genuinely never wanted. But damn, they did a great job. The free aim returns, and it's far more accurate than the Samus Returns version. I didn't go into it too much in the Samus Returns retrospective, but the accuracy of the free aim in that title was always like a bit rough. It was incredibly easy to just miss the mark when trying to aim, but the issue mostly seemed to lie within the 3DS controls themselves. Yeah, granted the game should have designed better around those controls, so it's still not excusable, but it's just something that I kinda had to leave out because my videos are already getting way too long as is. Dread, on the other hand, feels almost perfect. I've tried both on the basic controller from the Switch as well as the Pro Controller, and I can't come up with a negative about them other than, I don't know, hoping for less Joy-Con drift. We also have the slide coming in Dread. This does a few things. You can use it to quickly reduce the height of Samus's hitbox to dodge attacks and projectiles. It also looks cool as heck. Performing the slide is also useful for navigation under certain obstacles, but more importantly, it looks cool as heck. Another purpose of the slide is to smoothly transition into the Morph Ball instead of having to stop your momentum and then going into the Morph Ball. And also, say it with me, it looks cool as heck. If you actually said that out loud with me, then yeah, I mean, please let me know, because you're actually the best, and I'm sure everyone in the room is looking at you funny. Something else I love that the Morph Ball is a great example of is how to get out of traditional order of these upgrades. For example, you probably won't get the Morph Ball in Metroid Dread for several hours on your first playthrough. Metroid Dread lets you play with the slide for quite a while. you spend some time with this new mechanic. You get to know the distance and use cases. It's only after Dread has exhausted all of what the slide can seemingly offer to the player that you're finally rewarded with the Morph Ball, which now adds another element to the slide by being able to transition into the Morph Ball, as I mentioned earlier. I would love to see yet another Metroid game where more new upgrades are introduced and pre-existing ones are kind of unlocked in these really crazy out-of-order patterns. We also have the space jump, which, yet again, just feels way better than the previous titles. The space jump went from having this insanely precise timing in the earlier games to relative awkward timing to completely manageable with a bit of ease, and then Dread continues that upward trend of ease and use. It's pretty normal for me to get frustrated at least a few times in every Metroid game where I'll complain about the space jump timing, and with Dread, it did still happen, but it was once. Only once, and it was also during the final boss battle where I had died like 10 plus times at that point, so let's be real, it was clearly the game's fault.
And finally, we have the speed booster. This thing is so good. It's nuts. It's a literal god amongst items.
If you've been following Dread online at all, or played this game to 100% item completion, you know just how damn clever the speed booster is in this title. You know it's serious because I'm lowering my voice a little bit. I mentioned in my Samus Returns video that the grapple beam was possibly my favorite upgrade in Metroid, and after Dread, things have changed. I have a new love, and its name is Speed Booster. By holding down the left joystick, you can start charging the Speed Booster. By running continuously in one direction without interruption, the Speed Boosters pop on the back, they'll trigger off, and propel Samus at an accelerated speed. First off, this is the first time that the Speed Booster kind of makes sense. Previous to this in Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, and AM2R, Samus would just start glowing and moving fast with no indicator as to why. Having this jet propulsion really adds that extra kick as she's thrusted forward. The Speed Booster functionally forms the same as it did in previous games, but there's a major difference. You can wall jump in Speed Booster to keep momentum. Yeah! Not only is this used for puzzles, but wow, this is one of those quality of life I didn't know I ever wanted or needed. In psychology, there's this term called the flow state. You might as well also know it as being in the zone. In this mental state, when you're fully immersed in an activity and just enjoying the act of what you're doing. It's something that we all feel from time to time, and the reason I bring it up is because this type of addition, the wall jump to the Speed Booster, helps enhance that potential for players to enter the flow state. Maneuvering around the map of Metroid Dread is so silky smooth, and being able to utilize something as simple as maintaining momentum when wall jumping and changing direction ensures that the player can quite literally flow through the level design. The Speed Booster also comes with the Shine Spark, which is just as clever as ever, if not more so. Metroid Zero Mission especially really capitalized on making players utilize the Shine Spark ability in interesting ways that the series had never seen before. Not only can you Shine Spark to propel Samus in any direction, but you can also utilize the Shine Spark by triggering the effect from within a Morph Ball. In terms of unlocking upgrades, this is the most creative the series has been to this point. There were several rooms where I would just repeat attempting the Shine Spark trick, sometimes dozens of times, because I could feel like this was how I was supposed to be able to do it, and eventually, right, like it had to click. When you're finally successful, there's this feeling of satisfaction that little can compare to. There's more to say, but I'm gonna come back to the brilliance of this mechanic a bit later, since the level design is where it really makes it shine.
That pun was accidental, I swear.
Going through this retrospective series of the 2D Metroid games has given me a lot of time and potential to criticize my own work. Something I think I failed, though, to truly capture in my videos about the 2D Metroids is just how much I truly love the music, and I would like to talk about that a little bit now. Zero Mission, AM2R, and Super Metroid, particularly those three, have soundtracks that I regularly use songs from. I can't imagine living my life without some of the tracks from those OSTs. I referenced in my Samus Returns video that arguably my favorite Metroid track is Lower Brinstar. While Metroid Prime 2's Torvus Bog remix was my favorite to that point, I think Samus Returns does win with its own iteration of Lower Brinstar, known as Brinstar Red Soil. This song is a combination of Lower Brinstar from Super Metroid and Torvus Bog from Metroid Prime 2. Essentially the greatest elements of both slammed into one masterpiece. Granted, Brinstar doesn't exist on the planet where Samus Returns takes place, but in true Zabraxi fashion, I'm going to ignore inconsistencies since it's my favorite. I mention all this because Mercury Steam really nailed a lot of the music for Samus Returns. This was incredibly encouraging for me personally, since it meant that the soundtrack for Dread was in really good hands as well. So color me excited and surprised when I hit this point of the script where I wanted to talk to you about the soundtrack, and I genuinely had to go back and listen to the OST on YouTube, because honestly, I actually only remembered like 2 or 3 of the songs total. Yeah, that's a bit unfortunate. That also like it never happens. I love video game music. By this point, it's a bit difficult to truly say whether or not I remember so much of the 2D Metroid music because it's genuinely something memorable to me, or if because I've just played through the whole franchise again just before Dread, so it's kind of fresh on my mind. However, there are definitely a few themes that have stood the test of time. Samus's theme, Super Metroid's theme, Brinstar, Norfair, the surface of SR388, AM2R's Hydro Station. There's just so much awesome music that has stemmed from the 2D entries in this series, some of which have become staples that have permeated into the remix scene with some of the best video game alterations you'll ever hear. OC Remix is loaded with incredible Metroid remixes. You know what? I take it back. It isn't difficult to say whether the Metroid franchise has some incredible music that has stood the test of time, because it has melodies that have lingered in my head for years.
And this leads us to the Dread soundtrack. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, so I'm gonna make a different Zabraxi say what I'm about to say. It's the power of editing. The soundtrack fucking sucks. It is no Legend of Dragoon. Oh, hey, Zabraxi. There's something about the way that guy looks that just... it freaks me out.
Dread mostly abandons catchy melodies and instead aims for modern-day atmospheric music. There are still a few tracks that will stick in your head. However, most are pretty forgettable. Atmospheric tracks by now are no means a bad thing, right? Like, we can all understand that. Arguably, though, what made Super Metroid's music so iconic after all these years is just how environmental and atmospheric it does come off. Yet, Dread doesn't do much that sticks with the brain. It rarely lands a beat that lingers and plays in the back of your mind the next day when you wake up. Fusion also suffers from this problem, but when Samus Returns dropped and brought with it some amazing songs that I listened to on repeat for weeks, I just didn't expect Dread to drop the ball so quickly. Overall, I genuinely think Metroid Dread whiffed on this one, like majorly. You can make amazing atmospheric music while also still being catchy and memorable. Even after several playthroughs by now, I regularly forget what song is what, and I definitely can't mouth out the beat to practically anything in this game. I personally wished I liked what was here, but overall, I really don't.
Oh hey, would you look at that? I already forgot about all the songs we just talked about. Sweet.
Samus Returns had quite possibly the worst level design of all 5 Metroid games that I've covered before now. Metroid 2 in general struggles with its level structure, and this is seen egregiously in the Game Boy version, but even the fan favorite AM2R suffers from some of those same shortcomings. It was rough to decide how much of Samus Returns' issues were tied to Metroid 2 or were the result of Mercury Steam. This here, the map and level creation of Dread, was my biggest fear coming in. Moving through the environments of Metroid might just be the most important element of all of the games in the franchise, both 2D and 3D. Starting Dread, I was planning on scrutinizing this element of the game incredibly harshly. The result? I think we might have the best Metroid level design in the entire series. Damn, it is so good. Right out from the opening of Metroid Dread, we're presented with Artoria. Here, we start with the Chozo architecture in the background, an elaborate natural cave system, alongside some sci-fi technology. What a perfect way to start! These descriptors are quite literally the most core elements of Metroid's level aesthetic. There's this principle called establishing theme, or also known as the big idea, where the observer is given the context of the world that this story is to take place in. This is across books, film, theater, and even video games. Mega Man X established its theme in the prologue level and is widely considered one of the best first levels in gaming since it established the aesthetic, the gameplay mechanics, and critical characters to the plot, along with teasing the future of the narrative. Ocarina of Time's Kokiri Forest would be yet another wonderful example, and Nintendo stepped it up even further with Outset Island from Wind Waker being an amazing work that just establishes the necessary context for the player brilliantly. Artoria is phenomenal at conveying the world of Metroid Dread and the location and habitat of Planet ZDR. Platforms are set up in such a way that they force you to learn the physics of Samus's movement. The backgrounds are littered with animals and activity, more than we've ever seen in Metroid to date. The harsh contrast of the broken Emmy area and the first real Emmy threat is harsh, and this air of danger is thick throughout the whole section. Locked off areas also exist only to tease the player of what's to come in the future. The greatest accolade to the opening of Dread, though, is that it's basically impossible to get lost for more than a minute or so, while also letting those moments still exist where you have to consider the world around you in order to navigate to the next location.
And this leads us to the David Jaffe room. Yeah, if you followed Metroid Dread around its release, then you know where this goes. It essentially boiled down to a guy getting stuck in a video game, and when his chat on stream informed him of the solution, he spent days and actually weeks doubling down that the only reason he got stuck was because of bad design. The whole thing was pretty overblown, including by David Jaffe himself, and what really ended up happening is that a man let his pride get in the way of truly analyzing a design solution. What made people dogpile on him more is that he's David Jaffe, a legendary game designer. So yeah, that was a bit of a bad choice. Let me make it clear, I'm not here to make David Jaffe look like a fool or anything. He did that just fine on his own.
Along the pathway through Artoria, Samus will stumble upon this room here. It seems like nothing special. David Jaffe was informed of the solution, which is to shoot this set of blocks, which would allow you to progress forward. In his week or so of defending his claim that this was bad design, we actually stumble upon this room being actually one of the most cleverly designed fakeouts in a Metroidvania to this day. It's not perfect, but I really do think it's something that we should look over. In order to do that though, we need to hit the key points of his own arguments first. David Jaffe made a couple claims, and these are the basic three that we're going to go over. First is that the shooting these blocks is a new mechanic that's not conveyed to the player. Second is that this dead end leads to wandering with no direction. And finally, that the solution is in no way telegraphed. So, let's take the idea of shooting the blocks as a new mechanic. I'll even go a step further and give him an argument that perhaps it's not a new mechanic, but maybe even a hidden one that's not conveyed at all. Adam Sessler also disliked much of Metroid Dread, and many of his criticisms was that Metroid was doing more Metroid things without adaptation to a medium that's evolved in the past 19 years. While I very much disagree, Sessler did do something truly honorable by inviting Gerard the Completionist onto the review to provide counterpoints and have a larger discussion. This is seriously a very admirable move, and even more reason that G4 returning is a good thing. Shooting hidden blocks isn't new. That's true. So the primary concern becomes, does Metroid Dread convey this mechanic clearly? Yes. Very, very, very much so. Early on in Artoria, the game shows you a missile block that can be destroyed to break through a dead end. The next wall, though, looks completely unbreakable. The game then conveys a message that some destructible blocks are hidden, and if you're ever lost, to try shooting your surroundings. While this is already a solution to Jaffe's problem, he interestingly takes it as a hand wave to dismiss any criticism of this mechanic. Interestingly though, it's not the message that's the key solution here. The wall still looks indestructible. It's only when you shoot, not missile blast, but shoot the bottom block that you're able to progress. The game has not only told the player the solution, but let them do it with both missiles and regular blasters, leading the player to consider that hidden blocks could be broken by either weapon.
Alright, Jaffe, we're 1 for 3 here, bud.
Next up is that this dead end leaves you wandering around with no direction, only to be lost forever and never to be able to return home to your friends and family. This is actually a bit of an awkward claim because Jaffe actually disproves this claim himself while he's on stream trying to provide evidence for his argument. In fact, by the time you reach this room, every other single path about 1 to 2 rooms deep is locked off. From the same room, you can't go through the top left because the area is too small to fit through. You can't go through the bottom left because that way is blocked. We can take the bottom right path where we came from, but that room has multiple paths that we cannot take, and the way that we did come from requires an upgrade to even go back through. The only option, the only way that we haven't been at this point, and the only way we can progress through is the top right path. Every other way is blocked off, and the only path forward, even if it seemed like a dead end or not, would be the dreaded room of the Jaffe trap.
All right, we're 2 for 3 now, but to give credit where credit's due, I'm going to give the point to David for this one because he actually proved this one on stream himself for me. He just wasn't happy that he proved it himself.
Okay, so here we are. I actually wanted to take a quick look at the Jaffe room here specifically. I did blur him out so I don't embarrass him. I want to make it known, too, that I'm not here to pick on David Jaffe. I'm definitely poking a little fun for sure. But I figure since Jaffe is such a phenomenal game designer, he really is, it would be important to look at this room and the crux of it for design flaws and things that it does exceptionally well. Let's analyze it. Let's analyze it like a game designer. So how does this room work and what does it tell you as the player to break through the infamous big bad block-ish area here? So spoilers, breaking through these red blocks is the solution. They're hidden, it's a secret. As I mentioned, there's a tutorial that will tell you to shoot through blocks, etc. But we're gonna go a little bit further than just that tutorial. So first things first, when you walk in, when you are Samus, you actually enter this room from down here, and you're angled facing up this way. There are enemies that are listed, say one here, and there's one enemy here. And there's going to be, there's another on the other side as well with a missile tank underneath. Your aim is literally at this angle. If you are to shoot at this enemy, and hit it, it'll die. And if you overshoot, you'll hit one of these blocks and they'll break. If you shoot at this guy here, you'll hit it. If you overshoot or miss, you'll hit one of these blocks and you'll break it. Now, there is a really off chance that you're just a god gamer and hit all of the enemies perfectly and never once, miss, and therefore you wouldn't notice this. So there's a couple things we can do with that. We're going to leave this here so you can kind of still see all of the ways in which this spots. Well, there's a couple more we're going to talk about. The other of which that is enemy based, at least, is these guys up here. They're up here. They're saying hi. There's clearly an indication here that there's something above. And where this gets doubly done is if you notice here over in our mini-map, to erase that's a little bad, but if you notice there in our mini-map, there is a gap between the two rooms, but there's another room right here above the room that Samus is in by that indicator. The game is telling you there's another room up here and that you should be aware of it. Another indicator that there's something above Samus. There's also another indicator here, and one that is rather subtle, but I've heard people specifically say that they found the way through here because of this. This window of lava is continually joined all the way across both screens, indicating that this layer here is an element of the foreground, and there is an element of the background that will actually, coalesce to the bottom, and you can easily see that now between these two pieces, you might be able to get through here. And we're not done yet. We can keep going. So if we can talk about, say, the map layout, just the room layout itself, you start at the bottom left here, as I said, so you come this way, you're angled up to here, you come this way, you're angled up to here, and you come across this panel that Samus is on right now. And if you come from the opposite side, this element of the room is this bottom chunk of the room is symmetrical. It comes down here and goes across, it comes down, it goes across. It's intending to show you to angled. Everything is funneling you to this top of the room. there's clearly something here, especially considering this area to the side is a straight, harsh wall, one that you can see to make sure that the player knows not to go towards the right wall and to not bother with it. This element here, let me erase that actually because it's a little in the way. This element here is showing you that there's a red wall, which you've already established by this point in the game that the red hot rooms are dangerous. So you don't want to go there. So you have to go to this room above. It's really incredible how much this room has shown the player. Now you can get really, really specific and make comments like the fact that this element of the room looks a bit different. I've seen some diagrams and whatnot that this element of the room looks different, but arguably it looks the same as here. But the only thing that I can give Jaffe about this room, despite all of the indicators aiming at there being something in this red area, is that the game could have put a different enemy at the top here. You could have put those hanging dangly guys and could have put like one here, and one here to increase the likelihood of enemies getting missed and accidentally breaking these blocks. Besides that, if you make it any more obvious, it would ruin the surprise of stumbling through this little secret area that, as you can see by this diagram, is not so secret.
I don't want to keep beating up on David Jaffe here. That's really not my intent. The internet has done that plenty, and they're far more brutal than I am. What I wanted to do is expose that this really is just a matter of ego and pride, and when you look at it through the lens of a designer, that room is actually really good. So thank you, actually. Thank you, David Jaffe, for quite literally helping the internet and the world see how well designed Metroid Dread was. We couldn't have done it without you.
We still haven't even touched on the new areas like the sacred Chozo site of Ferenia. For the first real time in Metroid, we get a sense of the majesty and scale and the sophistication of the Chozo people. Everything is so beautifully crafted with regal colors and architecture everywhere. What's even more brilliant is how the level boundaries shift when in Chozo created areas that feel less natural. It's the same comparison as coming from Super Metroid to Metroid Fusion. The BSL station genuinely feels more handcrafted, and that's fitting to the lore of the location. There's also the flying spaceship of Itarash, which is grossly underutilized and could have led to some absolutely breathtaking backgrounds given the ability to observe ZDR from above. Perhaps this desire to see a grander scale stems from the fact that Dread is an incredibly linear game when compared to titles like Super Metroid. I know there are a lot of folks out there who became infuriated at the thought of getting lost in a game. I get it. I've been in those conversations where the other person is quite almost foaming at the mouth because not having a clear indication or waypoint indicator to the next location, they believe that is bad design and only bad design. I get that feeling, and I couldn't disagree with it more. That sense of confusion only adds to the atmosphere at times. Getting lost in alien isolation as you sprint from the xenomorph adds to the tension and panic. Yeah, you could argue that it wasn't fun because feeling lost isn't ever a good feeling, but neither is losing to a boss, or having a party member die in the story, or remembering that there still isn't a sequel to The Legend of Dragoon. I think the key is for how long the player is lost and has that feeling. That length can change the feeling from an interesting puzzle to solve to an infuriating experience. We see this with some Zelda puzzles as well, like the notorious statue puzzle in Twilight Princess. Struggling on it for a minute, it's not so bad. But 30 minutes and, well, yeah. Maybe Hyrule's just gonna have to find a new hero this time around. Hollow Knight wonderfully played with the idea that the player can explore and reach destinations because multiple paths would lead to the same endpoint. Dread does this as well, and yeah, it's great. However, once that veil is lifted, the sense of scale and scope of the world immediately crumbles. The amount of random pathways that Super Metroid lets you stumble upon still makes the game feel larger than it really is, even to this very day. Dread is very close to nailing that as well, but still aggressively limits where the player can and cannot go on a regular basis. Perhaps just a bit too much, genuinely for my liking at least. On the flip side though, this is coming from someone who has played every mainline Metroid several times now. If Metroid Dread is someone's first ever Metroidvania in general, then yeah, I actually have to concede that it might be a better balance than Super, or heck, even Hollow Knight. I will own that comment. While the aesthetics of some areas are great, about half of the game is actually relatively forgettable. The environments on display here are the same as what we've seen in the past. Cataris, for example, is just another lower Norfair, but instead of ancient ruins, it's recent ruins. We've essentially swapped out rocks for metal as the unique variable. Cataris does do one thing pretty incredibly though. The first time that you go through this area, you'll immediately notice this massive structure sucking lava from the planet. Kirby would be so proud. You'll see these things several times, but eventually the super suck seems to stop working. When you investigate, you'll end up engaging into an awesome boss fight, which also has this bit where Samus rides the creature up the suck and just blasts shot and missiles into it. Seeing an iconic background piece regularly and then being able to interact with it in some way is really cool. Gavaran also has a neat attribute about it, but doesn't take it far enough. The lush green environment is beautiful, and having all of the animals running around gives this feeling of being in a jungle. To that degree, it succeeds. However, Mercury Steam limits Gavaran quite a bit by enclosing it as a research lab. This isn't inherently a problem, as the idea of Samus genociding through a zoo could be interesting, but the research vibe isn't really expanded upon. The underwater map of Berenia is similar as well. I am a huge sucker for underwater locations. I even like the Water Temple in Ocarina of Time. And Berenia actually might be my favorite place in Dread, but the underwater lab is all that it is, and that's all that's ever really done with it. If Mercury Steam could take another detail and extrapolate more meaning and flair out of many of these areas, then the aesthetic design of Dread's environments would be even greater and arguably the best this franchise has ever seen. The lack of memorable music compounds these problems to quite an unfortunate degree. Thankfully, where the level design shines brightest is the sequence break potential. What's brilliant is that Metroid Dread will tease sequence breaks even your first time through. You might explore to get an upgrade, only to, on your way out, discover another path that could have been taken to get into this room other than the expected critical path that the developers paved out. Outside crazy glitch skips that have been discovered by this point, the best thing about sequence breaking in Dread is just how cleverly planned for they all were. For example, one of the most fun Shine Spark puzzles to get a missile pack in Berenia will actually tease the fact that you can get the gravity suit super early. This isn't something that requires some cryptic understanding, but just by getting this missile pack, by playing normally for item completion, the sequence break reveals itself. That is awesome. Also, getting things like the screw attack early is an option. Getting the grapple beam early changes the entire way that you'd map your way through the game, and it's another break that I stumbled upon during my second playthrough. I happened to remember the room and thought, I wonder if I can make some clever jumps and get the grapple beam, and bam! I did it, I pulled it off! The ultimate proof that Dread encourages and planned for some serious sequence breaking is most famously the Kraid encounter. If you get the morph bombs early, which you have to go out of your way to do, you can basically one-shot Kraid by launching yourself into his stomach and blowing him up from the inside out. That is the ultimate revenge. This is so cool. It would be impossible for me to cover all of the sequence breaks in Dread, at least in this video. That would really have to be its own deep dive in and of itself. It also doesn't help that the speedrunning scene is evolving so rapidly. What I can conclude though is this. Super Metroid, to this day, has arguably some of the most famous sequence breaks in all of video games. Ones that were intended by the developers to be exploited and didn't rely on glitches or hacks. Metroid Dread has shown up to compete in a way that I would have never expected. It's so exciting to see designers embracing speedrunning to this degree, especially since it's so critical to the 2D Metroid formula. I never expected Mercury Steam to embrace it this much, but wow, I am so impressed and happy to have the Metroid design in their hands.
If you've watched the entire retrospective series up before this episode, then you know that I have a lot of criticism levied at the Metroid bosses. There are some standouts like Mother Brain from Super Metroid or the Chorizo encounter in AM2R, And Fusion finally has some good bosses, and so does Samus Returns, but in general, the series is pretty lackluster. I just really like bosses. I love boss design. I love when something just beats you up to the point of pleasure almost. I love when something's bigger and stronger than you and just destroys all of what you are and takes advantage of everything about you. Huh.
Metroid Dread is easily the hardest 2D Metroid, except the NES title. That game is the definition of brutality. As the years have gone on, the 2D Metroid series has evolved in a rather unique way. Nintendo has seen that the action elements from Super Metroid landed really well with players, and future installments have now aimed to grab that baton and run with it. Metroid Dread is the most action the franchise has ever felt, and it's the absolute best that it's ever felt as well. I've already gone on about the movement and the critical progress of the controls, and where this shines the most isn't just in the absolutely awesome speed booster sections, but in the bosses and enemy encounters. Outside a couple highlights in the past, Metroid Fusion finally introduced the series to a steady, solid string of challenging and fun bosses. Samus Returns would do mostly the same, with some incredible boss fights like the Massive Robot, the Queen Metroid, Ridley, and the Omega Metroid fights. The major problem with Samus Returns bosses, though, was just how little variance there was. Considering there were only 4 non-Metroid encounters, this really hindered the creativity from Mercury's team. I will stand by that this was a Metroid 2 problem, and the bosses of Metroid Dread validate that conclusion. It's been such a long time since I walked away from basically every boss encounter in a game and let out an audible yes! Even the first boss, Corpius, is longer than most boss fights in games I've played. This encounter teaches the player so much. It exposes you to common patterns, multiple ways to solve problems, getting used to aiming, and that these creatures are tough. They are trying to survive, and you are a threat to them. They will not be going down easy, and Samus is gonna have to pull out everything she's ever known to make it through. The ending of the Corpius encounter shows something wonderful though. Samus has been through so much, including genocide and even blowing up entire planets. She is no longer to be fazed by the dangers of battle the way that she might have several games ago. The final set of animations where Samus lands and just looks more confident than anyone ever should have the right to in that situation, man, it's so good. This is the perfect example of showing, not telling, just how far Samus has come. She doesn't think, she just acts. This is the sign of the ultimate warrior, and by this point in the story, yeah, Samus really does feel like she's developed to that degree. Kotaku might argue otherwise, but yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to sound dramatic, but that might actually be one of the most least thought out articles I've ever read through. And I've read some real winners. Shakespeare wonderfully wrote in Julius Caesar a line that martial arts references to this very day. Quote, "In great and dangerous operations, one must not think, but act," end quote. This is the core of a warrior, and that is exactly what Samus Aran is by this point. I would argue that the ultimate evidence of this lies in the moments leading up to Kraid. Samus approaching a building-sized monster and showing absolutely no fear as he struggles to break free from his bonds. He's been dealt with twice by this point, and Metroid Dread acknowledges that through the actions and animations of the protagonist rather than dialogue. This is the true essence of cinematic storytelling, and one that the video game industry doesn't always do well, but can do insanely well if we pay enough attention to it. Not every fight is a win. For example, the encounter that leads up to the cross bombs is a bit lackluster, basically matching how I feel about the upgrade itself, to be honest. It's worth noting that the fight does take a note from Metroid Fusion and utilizes the cross bombs against you in the boss fight, giving you a teaser of what you're about to unlock and how to use it in combat. I can't deny the streak of quality bosses though. This is easily the most consistent boss design in all of the Metroid franchise, Prime games included. And then there's Ravenbeak. Holy sh**.
Up before Dread, I would argue that the best final bosses in any of the Metroid games would be probably between Mother Brain in Super Metroid or Metroid Prime in, well, you know, Punch-Out! One of these encounters is a masterclass in subtext, narrative, and storytelling through gameplay. The other forces the player to capitalize on basically every tool and every skill that they've developed across the game. And I think that now Ravenbeak has just outshined Metroid Prime in basically every way.
The revelation that Ravenbeak was the true manipulator of Adam near the end makes us question when this happened. How long has he been guiding us? Why did Ravenbeak bring the X-Parasites here? Was this his plan the whole time? Is it true that he created Samus, or did he merely raise her? Did Samus have parents before Ravenbeak? Did Ridley actually kill Samus's parents, or was that a lie concocted to gain further control of her? Also, Ravenbeak? He couldn't have had a cooler name? I think I'll name my next dog Puppy Snoot or Dogtail then. The mechanics of the encounter are nothing to laugh at though, so okay, you win that one, Ravenbeak. Each phase ramps up to be more and more intense than the last. Every element of the primary toolkit gets used here. You can counter key attacks to change phases as well as other special moves to deal huge amounts of damage. The phase shift becomes your best friend as you're forced to spam around the arena. You can deal some severe extra damage with the storm missiles, which are a fantastic addition to this game. You'll need the space jump to dodge this spinning attack that he does. The power bombs can destroy this massive sun spell thing that happens in the final phases. Ravenbeak hits like an absolute tank and seemingly doesn't let up. This is by far the hardest 2D Metroid fight yet, and as the final boss, it's both fitting mechanically and narratively. So much of Samus's life and adventure has come to this moment. Quiet Robe requested Samus's help earlier in the game, and info dumped a ton to the player. We find out more of who Samus is and the impacts of her actions across the previous games. The events of Metroid 2 have directly impacted the goals of the Chozo and set free the power of the X-Parasite. Ravenbeak has the driving force of so much of the series and has even bred Samus to be the ultimate warrior to serve by his side. Yet now, in a time of heroism, Samus has come to ZDR alone to stop the threat of the X-Parasite, as well as the threat of the Chozo themselves. It's at this point that we have to return to the very beginning of the game. Our first encounter with Ravenbeak is quick and pitiful. We're completely outmatched, and he overcomes us with ease. In those final moments of that original cutscene, we see Ravenbeak holding Samus up by her neck. Her eyes close, and she fades out of consciousness, only to be left for dead. A failure. It's now that we're back to Ravenbeak, and more powerful than ever before. The latent Metroid DNA is flaring up aggressively, and we're finally about to win. This Metroid power has been hinted at throughout the game every time you absorb the powers from the Emmys, but this moment seems different. But he gets us back in that same position as we're choked out and we watch Samus struggle for breath and survival. Again, we watch her consciousness start to fade as her eyes close, this time for good, until... In a moment of perfect irony, it's at this moment that Samus herself is a Metroid. In another immediate moment of irony, an ex-parasite, the ultimate enemy of Ravenbeak, corrupts him just before his death. This moment feels like such an insult, since not only did this warrior lose to his sworn enemy, but is corrupted by them from the inside out. The final escape sequence, because, there has to be an escape sequence, is similar to the Super Metroid run, but to the nth degree. Samus has never been more powerful. Fully awakened Metroid DNA combined with her Hyper Beam just obliterates everything, living or otherwise. Just as the Metroids were seen as a biological disaster, now Samus is a cataclysm in and of herself. Upon finally making it to the ship, an ex-parasite infected Quiet Robe appears, and only to acknowledge Samus, bow, and have the ex-parasite neutralize the hidden Metroid DNA within Samus. There's a lot to try and unpack here, but I believe this moment is intended to be a bit ambiguous. Was Quiet Robe still aware, despite being infected? Did the ex-parasite simply match Quiet Robe's personality, and it knew the best ending for the galaxy was to sacrifice itself? Is the Metroid DNA actually subdued, or is Samus now a literal demigod? How many planets have we blown up now, by the way? Also a good question. Are we at 3? I think we're at 3. Maybe actually Samus should just stay in orbit for a while. Maybe she should take a retirement.
At this point, I think the only thing that's scarier than the way that Samus looks longingly at an intact planet might be the length of this episode. Yeah, that still might be true. However, a very close second to those things is definitely the Emmys. No, not the award show. People still watch the Emmys, by the way. Is that a thing?
Metroid series producer Yoshio Sakamoto decided to do something incredibly risky. He thought it would be a good idea to introduce a mechanic that relied heavily on one-hit kills, repeated interactions via backtracking, stealth, all of which emphasize the feeling of dread. That was ballsy. Ever since the earliest trailers of Dread, the idea of the Emmy robots chasing Samus around planet ZDR seemed like a fascinating new approach that could become the worst decision since Other M if it was tuned even just slightly off. There are several areas of ZDR that house these robots, and they scout their respective zones continuously. Navigating through their territory triggers this glitchy filter as the environment seems unstable. This robotic theming can even be seen so far back as the title screen as you watch the word Dread flicker and reconstruct. When Samus eventually meets an Emmy, the result is an escape sequence when you're forced to flee, since these creatures can take out Samus in a single blow. While you do have the opportunity to counter the attacks, the window is so low and the attack pattern so random that this is not a reliable option. You'll definitely get lucky a couple times across the game, but that's exactly it. Luck. Overcoming the other obstacles of ZDR is about cunning and skill and power, but surviving an Emmy is nothing but raw luck. Or at least when after you're caught. Each Emmy can have a different moveset, with one being able to stun Samus, another being able to move at accelerated speeds, and one can even shoot through walls and floors, which is kind of cheating. While not only do their unique abilities lead to the player of what upgrade will be received from these encounters, yet again borrowing the brilliance from Metroid Fusion, but the uniqueness of these skills means that just by the time that you're comfortable against one of these Emmys, they are now taken care of, and you're off to the next encounter where you're starting from scratch again. This is such a small but important distinction to note. This consistent element of variety causes just enough chaos to help remove the redundancy that one would expect when running into these creatures over and over and over again. Well, at least for the most part it does. At the end of the day, the Emmy formula still boils down to running away from them until you find the core, defeat the core, then use a charged up beam to melt and blow up the murderous robot. Granted, this process is incredibly nerve-wracking. Probably the most brilliant element of the Emmy encounters is when you finally defeat the core and are forced to spam the normal shots of the weapon to melt away the protective coating of the Emmy's armor. Forcing the player to kind of have to stand there and plant their feet and stand strong as this terrifying monster comes at you slowly lumbering, but surely definitely adds to that sense of dread. To that end, I'd say the Emmys are a massive success. Where they fall a little flat is in that initial escape. It's fine the first, second, and maybe even the third time. You'll very quickly hit a point, though, where you realize that your method and approach to escaping the Emmys is incredibly limited, and you'll repeat the same tricks and techniques across each and every encounter. This does make them a bit stale by the end, and you would think that having an Emmy being able to shoot you through the floor would have a massive impact on your counterplay, but not really. You're still just gonna run at top speed away from the dang things. I mean, why would you not just do that? This is where it becomes a bit tough to discuss too much more about the Emmy robots. You see, they make a really deep and lasting impact until they suddenly don't. About the fourth or so encounter, the formula is exposed, and at that point, the dopamine stops firing and the whole event just becomes significantly less exciting. The Emmys were a great idea and something that genuinely terrified me several times for the first half of the experience. There just isn't enough to keep that same terror the whole way through. The same creatures I would scream from seeing now have just turned into a mild annoyance, just another puzzle to solve. Thankfully, they don't detract from the experience though. This introduction is a net positive for sure, but one that is still a long way from being perfectly executed upon. I would love to see the team take another stab at creating these incredibly tense moments. For the first attempt, it was a pretty damn good one.
And alrighty, I think, let me just double check. I think we're done. I think that's everything. Do you know what this means? I can finally play some non-Metroid games. I can finally play through the Golden Sun series, the series that I love, but I've never fully completed. I can also start the Suikoden games that I've desperately wanted to play and just haven't had the time to get to. I can play Dragon Age Origins again. It's great. I can play through the Terranigma series. There's 3 games, it's a great trilogy, and I would love to actually play through them. If I'm desperate, I could even play Final Fantasy VIII. Or not. Not is a good choice too.
In the past few months, I've gone through 5 2D Metroid games. I did a long-form retrospective series about a set of games that I enjoyed, and some of which I hadn't even played yet. I was able to see just how masterful Zero Mission was. I discovered the absolutely breathtaking fan game AM2R. My love for Super Metroid was validated once more. Metroid Fusion showed that a massive departure from the formula can be the right choice. Samus Returns let me know that Mercury Steam could make games that were better than Castlevania Lords of Shadow. I told you I wasn't gonna let them live that one down. And then here we are with Metroid Dread. This whole series was to get to this point. My excitement for Dread was incredibly high. Now that the series is over, how does it feel? Honestly, during the writing of this script, I heavily debated playing through the Prime series because Metroid is just that good, and it got me to want to engage more in that world just by writing about it. After this 6th video of Metroid is done, I can say for certain that Metroid is one of my all-time favorite video game series. So Metroid Dread, to finally answer that question that I asked at the start of this video, is there a place for 2D Metroid in the modern era? Yes, 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 there is. The reception was incredible. The game has been nominated across so many Game of the Year lists, it's impossible to keep track of. Metroid Dread is also just better than I could have ever predicted. The sheer level of creativity, the potential for sequence breaks, and mechanical fidelity put this title among the greats. I can say with confidence that Metroid Dread sits alongside Zero Mission and Super Metroid as potentially the greatest of the 2D series, if not the whole franchise. Dread's existence will help push the genre even further, and I can't wait to see what Mercury Steam comes up with next. And trust me, I never thought I would ever say I wanted Mercury Steam to make more games. Metroid Dread isn't just an incredible 2D Metroid game, but it might just be my new favorite of the entire franchise.
What a journey it has been. If you've watched every episode through this series, wow, seriously, thank you. I can't say thank you enough for that. That means so much to me. If this is the first episode that you're seeing in the series, then I hope you check out the other stuff, and I hope you enjoyed. With that out of the way, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!